For some time, we've been treated to an outpouring of what can only be described as anti-Easter literature, specifically a cult favorite tactic used by the cults. But even the pagan world and Christians are telling us how the holiday, in this case Easter, is pagan in origin and bad, and should not be celebrated by Christians. These opinions are backed up with some very rather unusual and curious fantasies masquerading as historical facts. The following videos are intended only to re-examine popular historical claims of the origins of Easter, to provide further discussions concerning some of the so-called facts offered in some anti-Easter publications.
Name Istshar is associated with the Babylonian Queen of Heaven. The egg-laying Easter hare or Easter rabbit and colored Easter eggs were associated as symbols of fertility with Eastre, a pagan goddess of spring.
The instinct to see incongruous elements of festivals as pagan survivals is characteristic of outdated Victorian folklorism. To quote the English Ear, "The real danger is from a far more virulent virus." The idea that all customs, indeed all superstitions, nursery rhymes, and anything that smacks of folkiness, are direct survivals of ancient pagan fertility rites, and are concerned with the appeasement of gods and spirits. Although the suggestion of an ancient origin for our folklore was the central tenet of the Victorian and Edwardian pioneers of folklore collection, this notion has only become generally known in the last 40 years or so, and has taken hold with astonishing rapidity. The majority of the population now carry the virus in one form or another, while some are very badly infected. The problem here is not simply that these theories are unsupported by any evidence, but that their blanket similarity destroys any individuality. All customs will soon end up with the same story. Easter bunnies? No, Easter, Ishtar, Astarte, or whatever name you choose, was not symbolized by a rabbit. The evidence for that is incredibly specious, relying in embellishments of one single dubious source. Bede. That the egg custom did not begin in the geographical regions of either Easter or any rabbit goddess just shows how desperate the anti-Easter Pascha arguments have become, having to join together bits of mythology unrelated geographically or historically in order to arrive at an accusation. The story about Easter's hare being a large, handsome bird, which she one day magically changed into a hare, is actually a hijacked Ukrainian folktale about the origins of Psyche. Painted eggs. Easter is not in the original. It is not authentic folklore at all. It apparently originates with the book Mrs. Sharp's Traditions by Sarah Ben Bruthnach, and stretches back into the ancient past about as far as the 1990s. Easter's favorite animal was a large, handsome bird, which in a fit of anger she turned into a hare. This is why each Easter a beautiful hare continues to build a nest, to fill with colored eggs. So what's with the bunny? It is a good question. The Easter bunny is a specifically Protestant creation, originally Lutheran, developed so as to not expose children to Lent, while explaining the eggs, because the colored eggs actually tie into Lent. It came from German Protestants not wanting to give up the colored eggs, but needing a new reason for them. But before we continue, you need to know that the Easter bunny is not a rabbit. It's a hare. Hares are larger and usually have a murkish brown hue that approximates the color of nests made by ground-dwelling birds. Hares also live above ground in nests, not in burrows as rabbits do. The earliest known mention of the concept is from an essay by a doctor in the late 1600s, who refers to it as an Alsatian, a region on the Rhine River that has been under both French and German control throughout history. Tradition of an Easter hare who acts basically like a Santa for Easter, judging children and delivering eggs, candy, and toys accordingly. Now, why the Alsatians picked a hare is harder to answer. What is certain is that it had nothing to do with Easter. Her worshippers were separated by the Renaissance Alsatians by a couple thousand years and several hundred miles. There are two reasons that rabbits entered the Pascha Easter picture. The first is because hares, which look like rabbits, were thought to lay eggs by some in early times. No, they don't really lay eggs. Unlike rabbits, in the early spring the European brown hare makes a rudimentary nest or form for each of her babies above ground in the tall grass or depressions in the ground. Plovers, which are birds and do lay eggs, often take over these hare nests after the hares are finished with them, and lay their eggs there. People without degrees in biology, or without even high school biology, sometimes reached the conclusion that these eggs were from the hares. Hence the mistaken idea that hares lay eggs. And so the link between eggs and spring Pascha time and rabbits. It may be erroneous, but it's not pagan. The other reason is that in ancient times, early historians and philosophers including Pliny, Plutarch, Philostratus, and Elian believed that hares were hermaphrodites and could reproduce asexually, not needing to have a mate. So, mistaken biology led people to use the hare as a sign of the Virgin Mary, who had Jesus without a human father. Mistaken biology is not the same thing as paganism. There are very good reasons to believe that Easter eggs and Easter bunnies grew out of early Christian culture and Jewish culture of the time. We cannot blame them for their lack of biology. St. Augustine thought that maggots and flies developed de novo from rotting meat. We can say they had strange ideas about biology, but we cannot accuse them of adopting pagan practices, when the evidence is as specious as it really is. Early German settlers in the Pennsylvania area abandoned the hare, and christened Peter Cottontail their Easter bunny. This was a sensible decision. Cottontail rabbits are ubiquitous in this region, and while this is technically not a hare, she makes a very well-developed nest on the ground, unlike the European rabbit who burrows.